What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video on the channel. Today, we're going to be giving out our first mock draft of the year. As you guys know, if you watch our college football rankings every single week, we talk about some teams, we talk about some players, but this is really a time that we get to highlight some players. It is only October, a few weeks into the season so far, so a lot will change from now to then. But this is just some initial reactions and what we're going off of. The rankings are based off of the rankings as of right now through 4 weeks of the NFL season. So, like I said, a lot will change. But starting off as of right now, the Bears have the top two picks. Who do you have them taking with the number one and number two pick?
Yeah, so number one and number two, the order doesn't really matter, but in the first spot, I have him taking Caleb Williams. We all know if you watch the channel, Banning is not a Justin Fields guy, and I am. But if Chicago's picking at number one, obviously Fields isn't going to be the answer. Caleb Williams is the best player in this draft. He checks all the boxes that you want from quarterbacks. And he reminds me of guys like Burrow and Lawrence, where we just know they're going to be the first overall pick. Williams is that guy unless something horrible happens, and the Bears will be able to start fresh with a new QB. And why not give him a weapon? Another arguable best player in college football, Marvin Harrison Jr. I have him in that two spot. Marvin Harrison Jr. He's an unbelievable weapon. He has the size, he has elite route running, he has speed, he has great hands. And really, I hate comparing players that are juniors to their dads, but he reminds me a lot of Marvin Harrison, who was Peyton Manning's best weapon ever. So if this happens, Chicago gets to basically restart the offense that looks super bad this year and just start fresh with two of the best players in college football.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I have Caleb Williams in the one and the two here. I think one of the best quarterback and wide receiver prospects that we've seen in a while. Marvin Harrison Jr., arguably the best that we've seen in a long time. Both of these players, probably two of the best, two of the top three at least prospects overall in this draft. And like you said, I think a lot of teams, maybe barring like 4 or 5 teams, I would say, if you're in this number one spot, you don't really care who your quarterback is unless you have like a Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts type guy. Any team, whoever lands in this one spot, has to take Caleb Williams. He's just that good. Marvin Harrison, it's perfect to match with. You're also going to keep DJ Moore too. So both of these guys with this offense and Caleb Williams being one of the best prospects we've seen, it definitely turns this franchise around a little bit, who hasn't been very great through the past few years. You tried it out with Justin Fields. You're not committed to him. And it's not like you picked him with the number one pick overall. You did trade up to get him, but at this point, it doesn't really matter since you got draft assets back and you don't even have to worry about it too, coming off of that rookie contract. And you're going to have Caleb Williams, who could be a top 5 or top 3 quarterback in a few years and be on one of the best contracts in the league still on that rookie contract. So you have room to build.
100%. And then in that three spot, we have the Raiders. Obviously, if you're familiar, we got Raiders franchise on the channel. So this is going to be a big talking point when we get to the offseason in that franchise. But in real life here, they're projected at 3, and they could use a lot of things I think we've seen in real life and in your rebuild. And a lot of them come back to that offense. You could argue edge rusher here, especially with Chandler Jones looking like he's not going to play in the NFL anymore. But the offense is pretty horrible, and I'm going to give him Olu Fashanu from Penn State. People are going to argue quarterback here. I haven't seen Banning's draft. Maybe he'll argue quarterback here. But the fact of the matter is that right tackle, they're starting Jermaine Illuminor, a guy that couldn't make the Patriots practice squad. That's not going to do it for me. It doesn't matter who you have at quarterback. You need a line to keep him upright. And Olu Fashanu is my favorite offensive lineman in this draft by far. He's technically sound. He's strong, and he's just a huge guy. When it comes to offensive linemen, I really think fundamentals comes first. I think a lot of draft scouts will look at these guys that are, have a big frame and wingspan, and they'll say, oh, their fundamentals will come in the NFL. And we've seen with guys like Evan Neal, I don't really know if that works. So I like a guy that's technically sound like Olu. I don't think the Raiders are going to compete anytime soon. They'll be able to get a quarterback, other ways, whether it's free agency or a future draft. Get yourself a franchise left or right tackle with Fashanu. I think it would be a great move for Vegas.
Yeah, and like you said, alluding to the Raiders franchise, Jimmy Garoppolo is playing a little better in real life than he is on Raiders franchise, if you guys have seen up to this point. And I would expect that a third overall pick in real life and in Raiders franchise could definitely come in. So I don't want to spoil too much for now, but if I was the Raiders franchise in real life, I think you went towards the area of offensive tackle, which I could definitely see. But I'm going to go with a quarterback here. I think Jimmy Garoppolo isn't really that great of a quarterback, and you can move on from him. I mean, you may not be able to trade him for the best haul, but I guarantee there's a few teams that if you said he was on the block, they would be willing to at least pick him up. And at this point, I think Drake May has come out as probably the second best quarterback in this draft. We may see things change. I don't think as of right now, that's when you look at these college overall players, and there's a lot of guys who I think are better quarterbacks right now, like Michael Penix. You could even argue Quinn Ewers is better right now. But if we're talking about prospects, Drake May is young. He has all the tools that you need from a quarterback. And if he goes onto this Raiders offense, which is still very good, you have Josh Jacobs, you have Michael Mayer, you have Jacoby Myers, you have Devontae Adams. The O-line is good. And like you said, you could address it here, but there's a lot of great tackles and some good interior offensive line that you can go with later. And I think Drake May is the pick here. You don't really want to go past that.
Fair enough. And I'm glad you're talking about Drake May for me, because at 4, the Broncos are on the clock. And if the Broncos are picking at 4, I know they're invested into Russell Wilson, but you can't let your team keep dragging and dragging down until Russell Wilson's contract is off the books. The earliest you'll be able to get off it is 2026. And in the meantime, you need someone that can throw the ball. I think it's Drake May for the Broncos. Russell Wilson kind of went against the grain of most Broncos quarterbacks. Most Broncos quarterbacks, they like the tall guys that are like sneaky athletic. And that's a guy like Drake May to me. He is not my favorite college football quarterback, but he has the fundamentals, he has the size, and even his freshman year, he showed that decision-making and IQ that makes him a top 5-ish pick for me. The Broncos have a lot of needs. Their defense is really, really bad, but this is a class where I like a lot of defensive guys down the board that they might be able to pick up in the 3rd round, 4th round. You know, there's guys that are going to make an impact all over this class. It's a very strong one. 1st round, when you have a quarterback that, you know, people might argue to be the best prospect at the quarterback position in this draft. I wouldn't, but some people would. I think you have to take that opportunity. Drake May will change the Broncos offense. And at that point, I don't know who a suitor for Russell Wilson would be, but I think there are teams that would give some value to have him in the meantime. Even a team like the Patriots, you know, I wouldn't like that move, but Russell Wilson has value to more competitive teams that are missing a QB. I think the Broncos just need to start fresh. It's not looking good over there right now. Get Drake May and maybe compete a little farther down the line, stretch your timeline out.
Yeah. And going on kind of the opposite area as you, I have the Broncos going with a tackle here. I think with the way the team's set up right now, we've seen Russell Wilson play pretty decent this year overall. He wasn't great last year, but I think they are committed to him a little bit. And like you said, if they can get him off in 2026, I think you can still have room to draft a quarterback next year. There's some good guys out there like Cade Klubnik, Drew Allar, who you could get in the 1st round next year. So I do have them going with a tackle here, and I have them going with Joe Alt. He's right up there with Olu. I would say that these guys are 1A and 1B, but I feel like the Broncos overall would like that frame of Joe Alt. I mean, just looking at him, he's 6'8", 315. Like, you can't teach that size. And I would say you could definitely argue that he's as good as Olu. I think they both are pretty much the same right now. I haven't really seen one come out that much better than the other. I think both of these guys are probably top 5 prospects this year, but I think he may fit this Broncos team a little better. I think you could go with quarterback. That's definitely in the cards, but as of right now, I think you still stick with Russell Wilson. You invested a lot in him, and as long as he plays halfway decent to good for the rest of this season, I think you'll be able to be fine. And even if you want, you're in the 2nd round this year, 3rd round, you can definitely go with a quarterback. There's going to be a lot of great prospects this year that can grow under him.
Fair enough. At 5, it's the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings obviously have like the worst defense in football. They could address pretty much any area of this defense. And I think we've seen in recent years, the most important position on defense has kind of shifted from the middle linebacker or safety into the edge rushers. So I'm going to give them the best edge rusher in this class, Jared Verse. He is versatile in the pass game and the run game. The Vikings need it all. They just need difference makers on that defense that hasn't really looked like themselves since like 2020. And their offense is fine. They don't need another receiver. I don't care how good the class is. Kirk Cousins is not a problem at quarterback right now. And when it comes to running backs, that's not something you need to address early. If your defense is really bad, Jared Verse is really good, looks the part at Florida State. And I think it would be a pick that Vikings fans are very happy about, to get another versatile edge rusher on that defense.
Yeah, and I'm glad so far we have a lot of different picks this year going in different areas too. For the Vikings, I have them going with quarterback here. I think Kirk Cousins is on the way out. I think he's going to be traded to a team, which I'll talk about a little later. I think they're going with Quinn Ewers here. He's going to be able to get up there. He is one of the best prospects in this class overall. And I think if the Vikings don't take him, there's a lot of teams within this top 10 or top 15 area who would go with him. I don't think this is a reach. I think he'll be able to play into that fifth overall pick area. There's a lot of teams that will be in this position that could also go with him, depending on how we see towards the end of the season. If the Cardinals are in the top 5 by then, whether their pick or we see their Texans pick get up there, I would say they go with him. But the Vikings at 5 here, I think as Kirk Cousins gets traded, I don't have an official mock trade for it, but I do have a team where I think he is going to go. I think the Vikings get Quinn Ewers here and they pair him up with Justin Jefferson, and that's going to be one of the best duos in the league. He's still young, and he was one of the best prospects coming out of high school football that we've ever seen, and he has been great for Texas this year. And by the time we get to the draft, I mean, if this Texas team is real, he could be close to a national championship. So we'll see what happens with that team. But overall, one of the best prospects this year.
That would be a really fun pairing. Next up, I have the Jets, obviously in the 6th spot, and I have them going a spot where some people might not like. They obviously have big problems on the offensive line. It hasn't looked good. Their quarterback room is kind of shaky. If you really wanted to give them a quarterback, I think you could. And they have problems in that, middle section of their defense. Edge rushers are fine, secondary is good, but there's a lot of ways you could put it. For me, I see probably the best overall player in this draft still on the board, and I have to put him here. I have Brock Bowers. No matter who the quarterback is, it's another weapon. People talk about the Jets' offensive weapons all the time. Outside of Garrett Wilson, I don't really see a whole lot there. Brock Bowers would completely change that story. He's the best blocking tight end we've seen come into a draft in a long, long time. He's a receiving weapon, and he would do so much for this Jets offense. If Aaron Rodgers is ready to go, he might be Aaron Rodgers' new favorite weapon as a rookie. Tight end is a position that doesn't usually hold a whole lot of value early in the first round. Obviously, we saw Pitts go in the top 5 just a couple years ago, and Brock Bowers is just a much better player than Pitts was going into the draft. If Bowers is utilized correctly in any offense, he will probably be the most productive player in this whole class his rookie year. And I think Aaron Rodgers would love to have a guy like him. So no matter what the Jets do across the rest of their offense, you bring in a guy like Brock Bowers, and your tight end position is set for, decades to come.
Yeah. And I have them going in a different spot here too. I think the Jets, I had Joe Alt going first. And I have Olu going second right now, like I said before, kind of 1A and 1B, but you can't pass up on Olu Fashanu here. Last year, I think if he entered the draft, he probably would have been a top 5, if not a top 10 pick overall. He decided to stay another year. And usually we see the draft stock kind of gets hurt just because there's more that can go wrong that really can go right when you're that high of a prospect, but he's still one of the best. You could flip-flop it either way. I think with the Broncos and the Jets in this spot, even if you get Joe Alt instead of Olu, either way, I think they go with offensive tackle. You're still bought in with the Aaron Rodgers experience coming back next year from his injury. So a guy that can help protect that side and hopefully make Aaron Rodgers last more than one snap next year.
For sure. And at 7 are the Patriots, my favorite team, and pick I bounced around back and forth with for a while. Obviously, I'm not a Mac Jones guy. The Mac Jones experiment hasn't looked so good. They could use more playmakers on that defense. The secondary is in a weird spot with Gonzalez out for the year and bringing back J.C. Jackson. Edge rushers, Judon might be on his last leg. Obviously, been super productive. So, and the wide receiver room is horrible. So there's a lot of directions I could go. For me, Quinn Ewers is on the board. I'm bought in on him, and I think he's just a much better prospect than Mac Jones ever was. It would make the Patriots offense be able to go in a new direction. I know he won't have a lot to work with when it comes to weapons, but that can be figured out in free agency. And if Quinn Ewers is the face of this Patriots franchise, as a fan, I would be pretty happy. Mac Jones, obviously, is going to be off his rookie contract pretty soon. There's no real reason or stipulation where you have to keep him around. I think Ewers goes in and is NFL ready off the jump. As you mentioned, Texas could be fighting for the national championship towards the end of the year, and I think he would be an absolutely electric quarterback. The Patriots obviously had Tom Brady for so long, but in their history, haven't had a whole lot of dominating quarterbacks. this is the first quarterback that they would invest in early outside of Mac Jones in a long time. And I think he fits the part. He has an incredible arm. And talk about football IQ, I talked about Drake May. I think Ewers might have the best football IQ out of any QB in this draft. I think Belichick likes that. I think the whole Patriots scheme likes that. And it would just be incredibly fun. So maybe this is coming from my heart more than my head. But Ewers to the Patriots would be awesome.
Yeah, and like you said here, with the Patriots, I think Mac Jones, we can both agree on that, is not the guy. I don't have them going quarterback, though, since they do trade for Kirk Cousins, but I do have them going with the edge here. I think you got to take Jared Verse. He's probably the best defensive player in this class overall. As of right now, you could argue Dallas Turner, Chop Robinson, but I think he really is the versatile weapon. Jared Versatile, come out here, and he would be perfect for this Patriots defense right now. With Matt Judon, with some injuries, I think he'll be able to come back. But if you have both of them on the edge, I mean, that's a pretty great duo, especially in the first year. Jared Verse is already, I think, will be NFL ready. We've seen him play great at Florida State. And he may not have the counting stats that we see from guys like Dallas Turner and Chop Robinson by the end of the year. But when you watch him play, you can see that he really is a special talent. And I think he would fit perfect on this Patriots team.
Yeah, that would be a pick I wouldn't be mad at either. Then we have the Bengals coming up at 8. The Bengals have a lot of issues. Obviously, Joe Burrow's looked slow. The offense hasn't looked good, but I think we can both agree their defense might be more of a bigger issue. They don't have a lot of things going on in the secondary right now. I'll give them my cornerback 1 in the class with Kool-Aid McKinstry. At Alabama, obviously, he has a fun name, so people are going to talk about him. But as a player, he's incredibly solid. He does well in man and zone coverages. Alabama's defense has been shut down all year, and he's one of the big players on that squad. The Bengals don't have like anything going on in that cornerback room. So getting McKinstry in just adds another face. And he kind of reminds me of a guy, he doesn't have the same build, but when it comes to a guy like Sauce Gardner, who was ready to go day one and had a really productive rookie season, I could see similar things from McKinstry. I think the Bengals would be happy that he's still on the board in this spot. In real life, towards the end of the season, I think we both predict the Bengals to be picking a little later. They might not get a guy like McKinstry, but if they do end up in this spot, I think he's the perfect fit.
Yeah, and like you said, as you guys saw on the podcast this week, we did talk about the Bengals potentially being done. I think we both agree that they still have a chance to get up. I don't think they'll be drafting at the 8 spot, but if you're in the 8 spot right now, Brock Bowers is on the board. Joe Burrow, Brock Bowers, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. I mean, that's just an unstoppable offense overall, especially if they're building up that offensive line. I don't expect them to be here, but if they are, I think you got to take Brock Bowers. He's my number 1 prospect overall in this class. He's going to end up in the same scenario that we saw with a guy last year with Bijan Robinson, who is probably the best prospect in the class, but teams won't really go with him. Like, I would be shocked if the Bears would draft him with the number 2 overall pick if they get the 1st and the 2nd, even though I think he's overall better prospect than Marvin Harrison. I think he is the best guy, the most versatile in this class, the best tight end prospect that I've ever seen, better than Kyle Pitts was coming out of college. And that's saying a lot because Kyle Pitts was very good. And if the Bengals do end up in this spot to get Brock Bowers, that offense becomes unstoppable. But as of right now, I don't think they will be. But having them in the mock draft at 8, I think you got to go with him.
Yeah, that would be insane. 9, the Cardinals are up here. They're a team that could be picking a little earlier, but they've looked good so far. So, I mean, good for Arizona. They're in the mix of a huge rebuild. They don't really have a ton of talent anywhere. And I mentioned the importance of edge rushers earlier in the modern NFL. And my board, Chop Robinson, is still there. He's one of my favorite edge rushers in this class. I think the Cardinals will be happy to take him. When we talk about guys that come off the edge, I think Jared Verse, versatile, as you mentioned, but Chop Robinson is just a force. He's hard to stop. He's incredibly explosive. And on a defense that doesn't have a lot going for it outside of Budda Baker, you just want guys that can play tough and make big plays. I think Chop Robinson would be perfect for that. Obviously, the Cardinals pick just a couple picks later at 13. They maybe can address the offense in that pick, but Chop Robinson on the board, I don't think you can pass up on him when you need playmakers on your D-line.
Yeah, and like you said too, the Cardinals kind of playing a little better than they are now. They may be a little higher once we get there, but as of right now, they have the 9 and the 13 pick. And with their 9th pick, I have them taking Keon Coleman here. One of the best receivers in this class. I think he is wide receiver 2 at this point. He's definitely boosted his draft stock a lot. A big physical receiver that would work well for this offense. We still don't really know what they're going to do in that quarterback area, but as of right now, Kyler Murray could get re-signed. We don't really know what's going to happen with that injury. But with all that aside, I think you got to take the best player. I think Keon Coleman is probably the best player right now in this 9 spot. And you don't want to let him slide because, as we'll see with the Giants up next, I think they could also go in the offensive direction.
Yeah, and with the Giants up next, I think they go in a very similar direction. I have the Giants taking Keon Coleman. Daniel Jones has not looked his best. We talked about that on the podcast this week. And the Giants offense in general has a lot of issues, but I just don't see them passing up on a top tier receiver once again. Keon Coleman fits the mold of a guy like Kenny Golladay that they tried to make work a couple years ago. He's big, he can high point the football, and Daniel Jones just needs more guys in the receiver room. Right now, Darren Waller is his best target. I don't think this Giants offense runs through their tight ends very well. Daniel Jones likes to hit receivers historically, and giving him a big wide receiver option with good hands, a good route runner, I think Keon Coleman would find like a ton of success in this Giants offense. They can address tackle and free agency. There are some big names that are going to be free agents. Hopefully, the Giants could make one of those guys work. And getting Keon Coleman in the draft, we've seen the value of young receivers on their rookie contracts. It's cheap. They produce at the same level or usually better than NFL veterans. And I think if Daniel Jones can finally build a connection with one of his receivers, that can make his like huge contract worth the money. Because I don't think Daniel Jones is entirely the issue. I think it's the O-line. I think it's the weapons. You got to address one of those at this 10 spot. So I have Keon Coleman going here.
Yeah, and I had Keon Coleman going at 9. I think the Giants do go with receiver here. The next up, my wide receiver 3 in this class is Malik Nabers from LSU, a 4'4" guy, 6 feet, 200 pounds, a good, he is a little undersized from a lot of the receivers that they have. So they may try to go with the outside area there, but they have a lot of guys in the slot right now, signing guys like Paris Campbell. Slayton is still there. Sterling Shepard is still there. He'll be there for a while, but we'll see what happens with these guys. And I think Malik Nabers is going to be great for this team just because, like you said, they can address offensive tackle and free agency, and they've tried in the draft to get offensive tackles. So I think the team is finally just going to commit to one of the guys where, especially if you're going to get a veteran free agent tackle, you feel way more secure than going and trying to risk it again with a guy like J.C. Latham, who would be good for them. But as we've seen with Evan Neal, who's one of the worst players in the NFL right now, I don't think you want to risk going with another Alabama tackle, even though I think Latham actually is good at football, unlike Evan Neal, even though I had high expectations for him. But Daniel Jones gets his number 1 weapon here, and that helps open up the passing game more. And with Saquon coming back potentially next year, even if he doesn't, you don't go with running back here. They just aren't, there isn't that first round talent. I think Nabers is the pick.
For sure. At 11, I have a guy that you had going a lot earlier in the real draft when it rolls around. I also expect him to go earlier, but here's where I have Joe Alt. The Packers looks like they found their quarterback of the future. Jordan Love looks like that guy. Now it's time to protect him. Obviously, Bakhtiari's been there for a long time, but he's aging. They don't have a ton going on the opposite side of the offensive line. Joe Alt is just a monster. I mentioned earlier how I like fundamentals, not size, but as you mentioned, you can't teach size, and I think Alt has the fundamentals that make it work. If you get your young quarterback, a stud offensive lineman to work with, a guy that's going to be there and, just protect him, just keep him upright. Joe Alt is a really good pass protector. He obviously with his size makes moves in the running game too. So that works for guys like Jones and Dillon in the backfield. I think the Packers are going to be super happy that he falls to this spot. As I mentioned, when the real draft rolls around, he's more of a top 10 guy. So having him at 11 might be a little low, but I just couldn't let him hang on my board anymore. He's really solid. You can't teach the things that he does on the field, and it would just be a perfect fit in this Green Bay scheme.
Yeah, and I have them going in the same direction here, though I already do have Joel and Olu Fashanu off the board. I have them going with J.C. Latham here. I think offensive tackle 3 in this class is really up in the air, depending on who you ask. I think Olu and Joe Alt are kind of those top 2 guys. I don't really see an argument for anyone else. But after that, I think it just depends on which teams are up here. Marius Mims from Georgia, dealing with a little bit of an injury right now. I don't think it'll be career altering at all. I think it's probably just a bad ankle and he'll be able to come back from that. But JC Latham, I think, is probably my OT3 right now. Some things might change. He's a big guy, 6'6" at 330, and he might need to work on that run blocking a little bit. I think there is a little bit of a drop off after Olu and Joe Alt, but he's a great pass protector. And if Jordan Love is this guy who you're really banking on, which he looks good so far, he may not be the greatest quarterback in the NFL, but if he can be a game manager for them, you want to block for him. Everything else is looking pretty solid for the Packers right now. I think you can address some other holes in later rounds. And JC Latham, I would say probably a top 15 to 20 prospect right now. A little bit of a reach, but you need tackle, so I don't think it's that much of a reach.
For sure. And at 12, the Saints are up. The Saints are kind of a weird team because they're not that great, but they don't have any super pressing needs. Their defense has looked really good, but they do have a hole at the defensive interior defensive line position. So I'll give him Jerzon Newton out of Illinois. He is just an insane player. He's a huge guy, and he's a great run stopper. The Saints have plenty of good pass rushers. They've addressed that in the draft the last couple of years. Their secondary is great. They have good linebackers. They just need a guy that can plug up the middle, and I think Newton out of Illinois can be that guy. We have seen the undersized defensive tackle become more and more common in the NFL. Newton goes completely against that, but like a lot of these undersized guys, he's a menace in the pass rush game. He is super versatile. We'll say that a lot about some of these young guys in the draft, but I think Newton does a ton of things well. The Saints would love to have him. And although the offense does need some work, on paper, they're not going to draft a wide receiver. The running backs look good. Derek Carr, although I don't think is the answer, is the guy that they've invested in. So why not buff up that defense and make them, league best? They're already top 5 in my book. I think it would just make a good thing better. And if the offense can figure it out, the Saints are immediately competing from that point.
Yeah. And the Saints here, I think defense, definitely a good area to go to. I have them taking Dallas Turner, great edge rusher overall. He's a big guy at 240, 6'4", so he'll be able to bolster up that edge. Like you said, this offense is looking solid as of right now. I think Derek Carr will be fine for them. I don't think you really address quarterback at this point. So I think defense is the move. Dallas Turner definitely could be a higher up pick by the time we get to the draft, even though 12 is pretty high overall. He's pretty close to Jared Verse overall. He's just, I would say, a little bit worse in some areas. But he's still probably the second best defensive player in this draft overall for me.
Yeah. 13, the Cardinals are back up again. I gave them Chop Robinson earlier. It's time to go for that offensive side. Their quarterback position, I know some people might be upset that I'm not giving them a quarterback at either of their spots, but I think Kyler Murray is still one of the better quarterbacks in the league when he's healthy. And with him out, Josh Dobbs has looked good. I mean, they have a lot of question marks there, but I don't think it's worth it to bring another guy in, especially with Clayton Tune still hanging around. Running back is a position that would be tough for me to mock anyone here as early as 13. So I think rationally you go to wide receiver at that point. They have Hollywood Brown. They love having smaller guys that like to play make. And for me, which is a bit of a hot take, that's my third wide receiver in this draft, my wide receiver 3, Xavier Worthy out of Texas. Obviously, he can make plays down the field, but with the ball in his hands, he's super electric. I love the things he's been doing at Texas. I'm not a fan of Texas personally, but you can't deny that offense looks incredible. And I think a lot of the credit goes to Xavier Worthy there. Worthy and Hollywood Brown in Arizona would make big plays happen no matter who the quarterback is. And hypothetically, if it is Kyler, I think he'd appreciate having guys that play make. That's his usual target, whether he was at Oklahoma or in his first couple years with Arizona. I think Worthy looks really good. He passes the eye test. He's a fun player. And on a Cardinals team, similar to their defense that really is going through a big overhaul, doesn't have a lot to work with, you just want guys that can make plays. So with Chop Robinson on defense, he makes plays. Worthy on offense, I think, makes plays. And you just need as much talent as you can squeeze out of anyone here. I think Worthy has a ton of it. So I think they'd love that pick.
Yeah. And the same thing for both of us at this point. I went with receiver at the 9 pick. You went with Chop Robinson at the 9 pick. I have them taking Chop Robinson here at 13. I think between him and a guy like Dallas Turner, it's pretty close. I think one of them may come out as the better guy towards the end of the season, but I have them kind of going back to back here with the Saints taking Dallas Turner and the Cardinals taking Chop Robinson. He's great off the edge. This Penn State defense has looked like one of the best in the country so far. Right next to Alabama, which we see with Dallas Turner. He's a great player overall. And at 253, 6'3", he's a big guy off the edge. And they get Keon Coleman with their first pick. They get Chop Robinson with the second pick. And overall, I think you're pretty happy with both of those guys.
Yeah, that would be a good haul for him. At 14, we have the Texans. Their offense has looked good. I mean, on paper, not something we expected, but CJ Stroud looks to be the guy. His receivers are meshing well, and the offensive line looks pretty solid overall. So let's address the defense. Their cornerback room is something they've addressed before. Obviously, Derek Stingley looks to be pretty solid. Let's get him some help. I'll go for another guy on the Penn State defense, Kalen King. I really like everything he's been doing. His man coverage is really well done. Penn State runs some zone. He looks comfortable there, and he finds a way to eliminate teams' best wide receivers from the game entirely. I think the Texans would love to have that. He'll have even a little bit less pressure on him because Stingley will probably be matching up with the number one guys. I think King does enough well where he can take any team's wide receiver 2 out of the game. The Texans, are a team that we project to actually look pretty solid in a couple of years. Bolstering the defense will make that happen. I think they're happy Kalen King is still on the board. He could even go earlier. So I think that's really good value at the spot. The Texans should be very happy to get him here.
Yeah, and with the Texans playing pretty well recently, I do have them going with the offensive side. I think we're in a scenario that we've seen before. The quarterback is looking really good. He's going to have a pull on this pick. I think Emeka Egbuka, you put him out there with CJ Stroud, you get him back together. We've seen this happen throughout the past few years with Tua, with Joe Burrow. When they have a guy that they just played with in college available, I think you got to go with him. Just make the offense even better. Their wide receiver room is pretty thin right now. So even with guys like Tank Dell playing well, Emeka Egbuka probably go in there and be one of the best guys right away. He has dropped a little bit on some people's boards. I think he still is one of the best wide receivers in this class. That's just what happens when the Ohio State offense hasn't really looked fantastic so far. And he's playing next to Marvin Harrison, the best wide receiver in the country right now. So it does come down a little bit. If he was playing on a different team, I would say that he could put up as good of stats as anyone in the country. We saw that before. Having 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdown games in playoff games is big. This guy is a good threat. You put him out there with CJ Stroud, who's been looking fantastic, one of the best rookie quarterbacks through 4 games ever. And I mean, another dynamic duo in the NFL right away.
Yeah, that would be electric. I won't lie. And at 15 is a guy that I've talked about off the air before that I'm a lot higher on than most people are. The Chargers really need a corner, especially moving on from J.C. Jackson recently. They really don't have anything going on in that room. I really like Josh Newton out of TCU. He's projected in a lot of people's late first round, early second. I know he's an older guy. He transferred from UL Monroe, but he just looks really good on the defensive side. He doesn't make a whole lot of errors. I think he matches up in man coverage particularly well, and he passes the athleticism test that basically all modern quarterbacks need to right now. The Chargers need anyone that's there. I think they're probably upset that Kalen King went right before them. I think they might have taken him there. But Josh Newton is the next best thing in my book. I'm interested to see if he'll be in your first round or in most people's first round. But I think by the time we get towards the end of the season, TCU might not be particularly competitive as we expected them to be. But I think Josh Newton's draft stock is going to rise tremendously. No matter what level he's been, no matter where he's been, he's looked the part. And I think the Chargers just have such a pressing need there that you almost need to address the cornerback in the first round. I like Newton over guys like Dejan, who I'll talk about later. I think he would be the right pick.
Yeah, and I also have the Chargers going with a cornerback here. Kool-Aid McKinstry dropped a little bit in my draft. I think he will go a little higher, but with a lot of teams in this top 15 right now, definitely needing offensive tackle, wide receiver, quarterback, I think he has fallen. The Chargers would love to pick him up here. He's one of the best players in this draft. I would say probably the best overall cornerback in this draft, and getting him at 15 would definitely help them out a lot. This team has looked solid, but like you said before, losing J.C. Jackson, who wasn't very good for them. They were expecting a lot of big things, signing him in free agency. He's gone now. They basically traded him for a pick swap, got like a 6th round pick for him. So overall, I think they go with cornerback here, and probably the best in the country right now with Kool-Aid McKinstry, a great guy to put on the defense.
For sure. And Jaguars are up at 16. You could say they need help on the offensive line, but it's mostly interior guys. Not a whole lot of top-tier interior offensive linemen in this draft. Wide receivers are good. Obviously, quarterback, running back looking solid. So I look over to their defense. Their edge rushers are all right. They have Trayvon Walker, obviously, who hasn't looked great, but he's kind of playing more of a sub linebacker role too. He's not necessarily on the ball all game. So I'll give him another guy in the middle. This is my second interior defensive lineman going, which might not be the case when the real draft rolls around, but keeping Leonard Taylor the third in Florida could be a move that the Jaguars really like. They need help stopping the run. It's not something they do particularly well right now. And I think Leonard Taylor would be perfect for the job. They honestly just don't have a ton of needs. This would be almost a luxury pick, but we've seen interior defensive linemen. If you get a good one, it's a game changer for your defense. And there's not a whole lot of good ones in the NFL right now. This draft class is strong in that department. I think the Jaguars would be happy to pick them up. Obviously, I think Taylor would be happy to stay, somewhat regional. And I think if the two pair up well, this Jaguars defensive line is not one to play with. And I think that might be the push that they need to be real Super Bowl contenders going forward.
Yeah, and I have the Jaguars here going with Jahan Newton from Illinois. Great defensive lineman for them overall this season. He's looked very solid. He was one of those guys that I marked as a big-time player going into this year in my top 25. A big guy on that D-line, and he's been good so far this year. I think it would definitely help the Jags D-line bolster that up a little bit. I think he's he's close up there with a guy like Mason Smith, who I'll talk about a little bit later. Mason Smith with a few injury concerns, especially after last season. I think that Newton has proven that he's the number one guy. But as the draft gets a little closer, I think depending on Mason Smith, how both of these guys test out at the combine, it could be a lot closer. But as of right now, I have Newton as my number one defensive lineman in this draft.
Fair enough. And at 17, the Commanders are here. They have a lot of issues on both sides of the ball. If you don't believe Sam Howell is the answer, you could definitely go quarterback here. But I think their defense still needs a lot of work. I give him Oyatu Latu out of UCLA. He's super versatile. He's listed as an edge rusher, but he plays a lot of middle linebacker as well. I know the Commanders have Chase Young, but he's been injured, and you still need edge rushers in the NFL. You need rotational guys. And if Chase Young is on the field playing well, Latu can be your middle linebacker. I mean, I really do think he's versatile. As a pure middle linebacker, he might not be my number one. As a pure edge rusher, he's not my number one. But considering how strong he is at both of those traits combined, I think he's 100% a first-round talent. He could even go earlier than this. I think the Commanders would happy to be getting Latu on their defense. They love getting athletes everywhere they can, and Latu is 100% that guy. I know you may address the offense. I know a lot of mocks will address the offense, but people say defense wins championships. The Commanders in an NFC East, they are going to need a really strong defense to keep up with some of these teams. I think Latu is just another piece next to or behind Chase Young that's going to make them look strong.
Yeah, and I am going to go with the offense here. Marius Mims, tackle out of Georgia, another big guy to help this line. Like I said before, I think his injury, he'll be fine. Right as of right now, Kirby Smart said he'll be back when he comes back in a few weeks. I don't think it's really going to be that detrimental to his draft stock overall. Probably just a rolled ankle. He's a great guy, a very big guy in this draft, and that'll help bolster up that offensive line. That has looked solid, but obviously losing a cornerstone at offensive tackle, this would help get them a good replacement there.
For sure. And at 18, the Rams are up. The Rams are in a weird spot because they look solid this season, but they have a ton of needs. I really wanted to go wide receiver here, but it comes back to a point I mentioned every time we talk about the Rams. It's hard to name 5 starters on that defense. They have to go defense here. Aaron Donald, obviously one of the best defensive players in the league, but they need more off the edge. And I think Braylon Trice out of Washington looks the part. He's a guy that works really well in pursuit. If something gets past him, he's good at catching up to it, got a lot of speed. He's creative. He has a lot of pass rushing moves in his arsenal that he likes to go to. And he's looked good at Washington. Washington's defense hasn't been incredible, but as an individual performer, Trice looks the part. I think the Rams just need talent anywhere they can get it on the defense. We've already ran through some of my top corners. The value at middle linebacker probably isn't this high at this point in the draft year. So I think Braylon Trice would be a perfect guy to come off the edge. Obviously, he'll need to work on stopping the run a little bit more than he has so far, but The Rams have that mostly covered. I think you just need guys on that defensive line not named Aaron Donald, especially with Donald, hinting at retirement sometime soon. Defensive tackles, especially undersized ones, don't last long. And if he goes, then you're really rock bottom defense. So you need to address it in the next couple drafts, in my opinion. Trice is a good way to start.
Yeah, and I also have him going with defense here. I have him going with Kalen King out of Penn State, my second best cornerback in this draft. He plays a lot bigger than he is. He's only 5'11". He's 190 though. He's a very physical guy. He's always at the point of the ball. It seems like he has probably the best overall ball skills in this draft. Comparing him to a guy like Kool-Aid, I think Kool-Aid McKinstry a little bit faster. That's kind of the one knock that I and a lot of people have on Kalen King. He may not have that elite top end speed, but if he can play kind of in some nickel packages, you put him out there, he can play these reads, the zone areas. He has ball mirroring skills like no one else in this draft, and that would definitely help benefit this team, who's looked pretty solid offensively. I think Matthew Stafford came back this season, and he's obviously getting older every single year, but he's coming out and making receivers that we've pretty much, Puka has come out here and looked like one of the best rookie wide receivers that we've ever seen. Matthew Stafford has done that his whole career. One of the most underrated players of all time. So I think offense has looked really good. Address the defense like we both did here. I think Kalen King, a very good pick. He could definitely go a lot higher than 18, but as of right now, a steal at the 18th pick.
Yeah, that would be a great pick for the Rams. Next up, I have a player that's somewhat controversial. The Falcons, if you've watched the podcast, I'm not bought in on Desmond Ridder this year. In the past, I have been. He has not looked the part. I think they go after a guy. He's hinted at coming back to college. His middle name is difficult. Just an electric quarterback. I have Shedeur Sanders going here at 19. He would just be the perfect player for this young electric Falcons offense. Kyle Pitts is obviously one of the focal points of this offense, and Desmond Ridder just hasn't been getting him the ball. I think Shedeur Sanders will make a point of that. I think he would have a great connection with Drake London, and it would probably just be one of the most electric, athletic offenses in the whole NFL. You imagine a backfield with Shedeur Sanders calling plays and Bijan Robinson running the rock. That's going to be tough to stop their, rookie and second years. Imagine 5 years down the line. That could be the best offense in football. I know Sanders, as I mentioned, he could be coming back. Dion says that. But if there's a world where Shedeur is going to go top 20 in the draft, I think it would be ridiculous for him to go back to college. I don't even think Dion would encourage that. And I think the Falcons would love to have him. It's a hot take because the Falcons have a ton of needs on defense. They could you could argue that they need more offensive weapons at receiver, but at the end of the day, you got to get a signal caller at some point. They didn't invest high in Ridder. He was a second round pick. He kind of came into playing by accident after the Matt Ryan era. I think Shedeur Sanders would be the franchise guy, and it would be too fun to watch for me to not at least mock it once.
Yeah. And like you said, a little bit of a hot take there. I think mine might be a little hotter. Shedeur Sanders, I think if he's in this draft, a great pick there. I don't really expect him to. Like you said, if he has the chance to go top 20, he should go in the draft. But I think there's definitely an argument that if he stays at college, he could be the best quarterback in the draft next year. Cade Klubnik and Drew Allar are probably the top two guys right now. I think Shedeur has proven that he's better than both of those guys up to this point. But if he's gone, in this spot, there's a lot of guys. We've seen Caleb Williams and Quinn Ewers be kind of those top Quinn Ewers, Caleb Williams, Drake May, the top three quarterbacks. Outside of that, I would argue that it's a free-for-all, especially if Shedeur doesn't go in the draft. And I have Jackson Dart going here. So a big lob. He's my guy. I've been a fan of him. Talking about him every single week at Ole Miss. He's looked electric this year. As of right now, I know he's mocked a little lower in some people's mock drafts. We haven't really seen that many come out recently. But I think as the NFL draft season starts to heat up, if Shedeur Sanders isn't in there, you're looking at a guy like Jackson Dart. You're comparing him to guys like Bo Nix and Michael Penix, who are a little bit older. Jackson Dart, still only 21 years old. He's young. He has all the tools to get it done. He is raw, but you can figure that out. You put him on this Falcons offense, and that rejuvenates this offense overall. We've seen them play well with Bijan Robinson. You're going to give him Drake London and even Kyle Pitts, who I know people are starting to give up on him every year. He's going to be able to figure it out. I think Jackson Dart may be the fourth quarterback in this draft as of right now. And especially me not being a huge fan of Bo Nix, Shedeur Sanders not being in this draft. I like Michael Penix, but he is a little bit older. I honestly think Jackson Dart is my QB4 as of right now. I know that's a hot take, but if there's anyone that's going to throw out the Jackson Dart propaganda, it will be me.
Hey, sometimes you got to call your shot. I mean, we'll be talking towards the end of the year, and maybe he's a name up here, and I think people will point back to you on that. But next up is the Colts at 20. I have a guy that you had going a little bit earlier. It seems like Anthony Richardson is the answer. He looks really good. I was obviously a big fan of him. He was my quarterback one by the time we got to the draft. And he just needs more weapons. No matter what they do with Jonathan Taylor, no matter what they decide to address in free agency, they need more weapons for him. And getting Malik Neighbors out of LSU would be really solid there. Just a really incredible receiver. He plays physical. He has good hands. Everything you want from a wide receiver. Anthony Richardson needs some guys. He hasn't looked like he's completely connected with a guy like Michael Pittman yet, but maybe that develops. And Malik Neighbors, probably a little bit more athletic, I think would fit well with Anthony Richardson's play style. I think the Colts need offense at 20. Malik Neighbors still on my board. Good pick there.
Yeah, and for the Colts, like you said, Anthony Richardson looks like he's the guy so far. I do have them getting an offensive tackle to block for him. I have Kingsley Sotomia from BYU, another big guy in this draft. All these offensive tackles are massive. He's another guy where he wasn't really that high up on a lot of people's boards coming into this season. He's played really well. He's one of those guys that's 6'6", 315. And like we said before, you can't teach size. He does have a few things he needs to work on, but he'll be able to do that. I think especially with the Colts overall, we've seen a lot of good, solid offensive linemen there throughout the past 10 years. So he'll be able to develop there too. Another one of the top guys at tackle in this class. There's a lot of arguments up there with a guy like him, Amarius Mims, even JC Latham, all these guys kind of in the same-ish area, all within that 10 to 20 range. So I think he's the best guy here for them. You want to protect Anthony Richardson again. You don't want to let him get another concussion. So be able to get a big offensive tackle.
Yeah. At 21, it's the Steelers. Their offense hasn't looked great this year, but I think it would be tough for them to invest in that again. It seems like they do it every year. And their defense is at a point where they kind of need work again, especially at safety. Obviously, Minkah Fitzpatrick's still one of the best in the game, and safety value has been kind of weird in the NFL draft lately. But I think you need another safety in that room. And Cameron Kinchens out of Miami looks really solid. He plays kind of a different style than Minkah. Kinchen's really fast, big hitter. And he's not the biggest guy, but his speed and his physicality gets him to the ball more often than not. I think, historically, the Steelers, one of their best players ever is Troy Polamalu. I think Kinchens is, comparable, maybe not as good, but similar style of game. And the Steelers defense, which, has a knack for being physical and, liking athletes in that secondary, especially, I think they could use him. He even profiles as he's not the best cover guy, but he could play corner if they have to. I think the Steelers like him here.
Yeah. With the Steelers here, they can definitely go with a few different areas. They got Joey Porter last year in the second round. I think they go back and address the defensive back area. I have them taking Cooper DeJean here. He's my third guy in this kind of cornerback safety area. I think with him not really classifying as a safety, he can pretty much play any defensive back position. That helps him a lot because we've seen teams be pretty hesitant to take safeties this high. But DeJean has been great. I mean, he's going to come out here and for the Steelers team play on the opposite side of Joey Porter, a very different player from him, which helps a lot. Joey Porter, a long, tall guy. Cooper DeJean, kind of a smaller-ish guy, but he can play pretty much all the positions. He still is 6'1", so he has good size. He's not as long as a guy like Joey Porter, but he can go out there, play DB. He can play corner. He can play safety. He can play whatever you really need him to. And my third overall defensive back prospect in this class. And I think at 21, a little bit of a steal. I think he has the talent to go a little bit higher, but we'll see what happens with that position-wise.
For sure. And at 22, I have the Titans probably getting the biggest steal of my mock draft. Dallas Turner still on my board somehow, and they would 100% jump on that chance. The Titans run a 3-4. Obviously, Jeffrey Simmons up front is a big name. They could use more pass rushers. Excuse me. Any team could use more pass rushers. Dallas Turner, super speedy, has some pass coverage ability. I think he'd be a great pick here.
Yeah, and I have them going with a linebacker here. I have them going with Latu Latu. I know a lot of people kind of have them in their top 10 area. A lot of people are very high on him. They think he's the best defensive player in this draft overall. I haven't really bought into the hype with him. I know there's a lot of people that, like I said before, think that he could be the best in this class. I think he's really good. I think 22 is a good spot for him. He might impress me a little more once we get towards the draft. A lot of people in that top 10 area, I haven't bought in completely. He's still a great player, but I think guys like Jared Verse, Dallas Turner are just a little more versatile than a guy like Latu is at linebacker.
Fair enough. And at 23, the Seahawks are up here. We've seen them invest in offensive tackles in the past. They obviously just got Charles Cross a couple years ago. I still think they need more there. Marius Mims is still on my board. I'm not super worried about his injury. I think the Seahawks would be happy to get him. I'm higher on him than a guy like Latham. I know you mentioned there's kind of a couple guys in that same tier after Olu and Alt are off the board. And I like Mims the most out of all of them. I think he would fit well on the Seahawks offense. And Geno Smith, I mean, he still looks like he's the answer. No matter who's playing quarterback, you need linemen to step up and keep them safe. And I think Mims does the part. I mean, he looks the part. He's intimidating. He has a mean streak in the running game. Everything you want from an offensive tackle in the NFL, I think he'd be great.
Yeah, and I have the Seahawks going with line here, just on the opposite side of the ball. I have them going with Mason Smith, who has a star next to his name for me. He's one of these guys that has the talent to be up there in a top 15, top 10 pick. The only thing that's kind of holding him back is I think once we get towards the draft season and once we see a little bit more from him, that ACL injury, a big risk, especially a guy like that coming off of the D line. If he can come out and prove that he's still as electric and he can go out there and be as agile as he was before, and he doesn't take a step back, especially in the 40 times, the 3-cone drill, everything like that, he could be up there in a top 15 pick. I think he's arguably one of the best talents in this draft overall, up there with Jared Verse. But we don't really know how explosive he's going to be at 6'6", 310. If he still is that explosive by the time we get around to the mock drafts, towards the actual draft, I think he could be a top 10 pick. But as of right now, I still have him at 23, which is still great first round talent, but a few question marks. He's a guy that definitely could be one of the biggest risers for me, though.
Yeah. 24 is the Cowboys. I have them going, taking what could be the first white cornerback since Seahorn. So shout out to Cooper DeJean here. The Cowboys just need more help in that secondary. Obviously, Trayvon Diggs was super explosive a couple years ago, wasn't as good last year, and now out for the year this year with injury. So whether he's healthy or not, you're going to need more in that cornerback room. Cowboys defense has looked good. Secondary could always use some help. I think DeJean, as you mentioned, very versatile. He could just be a safety. I think the Cowboys would be happy to have him in that spot as well. And I think DeJean is really solid as, you know, someone that wraps up and makes tackles as well. He's not scared of contact. So maybe that profiles him better as a safety, or it's just a good trait for a corner to have as well, especially in the NFL. So I think the Cowboys would be happy to have him. Their offense is fine. Don't really need to plug up too many holes there. Address your defense, take DeJean, good value at 24.
Yeah, and I also have him going with cornerback here. Since I already have my top 3 guys off the board, I'm going out with another 4th guy. In my opinion, the 4th best corner in this draft, Nate Wiggins, 6'2", 185, so a little bit lighter, but he plays a lot like Joey Porter. He's one of those tall, lengthy guys, and this would help the defense that is already one of the best in the league with the Cowboys. You pair him with a guy like Trayvon Diggs, who Wiggins plays pretty similar to. I mean, both of these long guys overall. And I think he could be a guy that rises up some draft boards. I know he's kind of projected towards that early second round area. I think the Cowboys would be fine coming in here and getting a guy that is very athletic, a long guy, can go out there and play very well. And especially with that reach, playing like Joey Porter did in college, it definitely helps them. Even if you don't have the best athleticism, the best speed overall, which Wiggins is pretty solid overall, but that length definitely helps you a lot, especially if you get beat by a guy, still be able to make a play on the ball.
Yeah. And at 25, we have the Lions. Obviously, last year we saw them address the offense and the defense in the first round. And pretty much everything you just described with Nate Wiggins, with the Jeff Okudah experience not working out, I think they need a guy like Nate Wiggins. So I'm going to give them Nate Wiggins. He's still on my board here. I agree. I'm higher on him than most. I think just as a pure corner and pure talent, he passes the eye test. As you mentioned, he's athletic, don't get me wrong. He's not the most athletic, but his size completely makes up for it. The Lions have no problem beefing up that defense. They did it with the interior first. They hit linebacker last year. Seems like this is the year they go back to corner. I think Nate Wiggins is very solid. He's looked really good at Clemson. I think he'd be the perfect guy in this Lions defense.
Yeah, and I have the Lions also going with defense too. I have them going with J.T. Tuamalia from Ohio State, another great edge rusher in this draft, which we've seen a bunch of so far. He's been great so far for Ohio State. This defense has been really good. 6'4", 270. He's got good speed, and he's good getting in between that low pad level. He's been great so far. And I think the Lions, especially with what Dane Campbell is running over there, you put him on the opposite side of Aiden Hutchinson and another great edge duo in the NFL.
Yeah, that would be super fun. 26, I have a guy that's kind of fallen way too far for me. Realistically, he's way better than the spot. So you could call this the biggest steal of the first round instead. I have JC Latham. Just a really good offensive tackle. Teams could always use tackle. And with Teron Armstead looking like he's down with injury, he could be back, but it wasn't super encouraging to watch for the Dolphins. Definitely need to address tackle. Even if Armstead's okay, offensive linemen don't last super long, especially when they reach older age. And Latham could step in and be really solid there. He's not necessarily at the same level of guys like Fashanu that I mentioned way earlier in this draft. And I think some people are a little bit higher on him than I am, but there's no denying he just plays the right way. Alabama's had a lot of problems at quarterback, and he has not made it any worse. He is making Alabama's offense look better than it actually is, and that's saying a lot because they're pretty horrible. Latham, offensive linemen from Bama have kind of a weird track record in the NFL, especially outside linemen who, have not aged super well. You look at, just historically, the Raiders.
Evan Neal.
Evan Neal comes to mind. There's a lot of teams that take Alabama offensive tackles that don't work out. I think Latham's a little bit different. As I mentioned, I'm all fundamentals for these guys. He has much better fundamentals than a guy like Neal. And I think that with that being said, Dolphins offense is really high powered. You don't need playmakers. The defense hasn't been great on paper, but I'm pretty invested into them. I think they'll figure it out. Offensive tackle seems like the hole on this offense, so I'll give them Latham.
Yeah, and I also have them going with a tackle here towards the end of the first round with mock drafts this early. We do see a lot of guys kind of getting picked a little higher than I would expect. Graham Barton from Duke here, I have them going with. He's kind of towards that second round pick area, but I think with a guy as versatile as this, he is recruited as a guard. He's played guard, he's played center. Now he's been at tackle through 3 years at Duke. And with that versatility, especially with teams that we've seen throughout the season having so many injuries to their offensive line, if you can have a guy that can play all 5 positions on your offense, a guy coming in at 6'5", 306, which is pretty good for any spot on the line. Even if you put him at tackle, which they do have a big hole at. I think Barton will boost up some draft boards. And I think at 26, maybe a little bit of a reach. But when you're drafting for position, you don't really care where the mock drafts say that you're going. He's the best tackle available left. So I think you got to go with him. Definitely worth a first round pick with that versatility.
For sure. And at 27, it's another one of my hot takes. I'm not bought in on Baker Mayfield being the Bucs quarterback of the future. I don't even think Bucs fans are bought in on that. So I'm going with another quarterback. Bo Nix is on the board. Riley Leonard is on the board. I'm going to give the Buccaneers Michael Penix. I think he's ready to play day one. The Buccaneers have pass weapons. They have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Michael Penix knows how to spread the ball around, throw it deep. I think he would be super electric in this offense. Obviously, any lefty quarterback, people will see as some sort of risk because they don't play prototypical. Your right tackle really becomes your left tackle with the blindside blocking. But Penix is just so talented. We've seen it at Washington. Some people might have him as their Heisman favorite at this point. I know we're pretty close to that. And he just fits the part of an NFL quarterback. I know he's older. There's a reason I don't have him going in that top 5 range like some draft websites do. But when it comes to just playing the position, he's really good at it. I don't think Buccaneers fans would be mad moving on from Baker Mayfield. Kyle Trask obviously isn't your guy either. Get another quarterback, let him run the offense. Although the Buccaneers might not really be competing, they might be picking earlier than this in real life. They could compete going forward. I mean, they have a good defense, they have weapons, and if you bring in Michael Penix, who's ready to compete day one, I really see good things coming from that. So it's a hot take. I can completely understand them going a different direction if they have pick number 27. But with Penix still on the board, I think he's a first round talent. He deserves to be taken in this spot.
Yeah, and I think we could probably both agree. I would be surprised if the Bucks end up picking at 27, but since they are here, I do like the idea of going with a Washington offensive player. I'm going to give them Rome Odunze here, one of the best overall wide receivers in the country right now, a great prospect, and like we've seen, they still could address a quarterback in the second round. You could address it in free agency. There's always guys available. They may think that with what they have right now with Baker Mayfield could be the option. But either way, even in the second round, I think you could definitely argue that they could go with a guy like Bo Nix or Michael Penix or whoever's available. But as of right now, I'm going to have them take Rome, who is one of my favorite receivers in this class, in a very stacked class overall. Another great offensive player for them.
Yeah, and at 28, the Bills are here, and I'm going to give them a receiver as well. Mecca Egbuka is still on my board. I like him too. I'm not really as down on him as some other scouts are. This is just kind of how my board fell. But Egbuka, I mean, really good after the catch. I'm still worried about Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs' relationship. It looks kind of shaky at points. Gabe Davis isn't going to be on the team forever. He's going to be a free agent this year. So Egbuka could step in and be really solid as another weapon for Josh Allen. He's another guy, like a lot of guys on this class, that's good with the ball after the catch. He's even, something I noticed is he's a really good run blocker as a wide receiver, which is something that doesn't get talked about a lot for receivers, but it is important. If this Buffalo offense figures out a solid run game, he's going to be involved in that. So he's versatile. He can kind of play. He will probably play in the slot in the NFL, some will say, but he has versatility to play on the outside if need be. I think Egbuka will probably go higher than this. I'm really high on a lot of the wide receivers in this draft. Bills would be happy to have him here, and I think the hypothetical chemistry between him and Josh Allen would be really solid.
Yeah, and I have them going with defense here. I have them taking Michael Hall Jr., another great defender from Ohio State on the defensive line. And I think it would definitely help them out here. They're kind of in the need for a guy on the D line and probably the best left available, Michael Hall. Bigger guy, 6'2", around 300 pounds. He's got good speed. He'll be able to get through the pass rush there. And especially with the way that their depth is on that D line right now, I think it would be a good addition for them. And overall, just a great pick towards the end of the first round. Definitely good value.
For sure. And at 29, the Ravens are on the board. Ravens, another team, all these AFC North teams, they love to beef up their defense. And I have a guy that you had a star next to earlier in Mason Smith. His size is incredible. He's a really tall guy at the defensive tackle position. And I mean, as you mentioned, he does a lot of things really well. He's not necessarily going to be an edge rusher, but he can move around on that Ravens defensive line. Obviously, since Judon left a couple of years ago, they've struggled in certain aspects of that line. They have guys like Owe and Mafe on this defense as the edge guys. Get a guy that can plug up the middle. Get a guy that can do a lot of things well with Mason Smith. I am a little less worried about his injuries. I think hopefully, I'm hoping for the best for him because he's an incredible player. When the time the draft comes around, the Ravens will probably be picking pretty late into the first round. He should be available around that spot. I think it would be a great pick. The Ravens, you could say wide receiver. In certain mocks I've done, I've given them wide receivers here. But a lot of my top tier guys are off the board at this point. And Zay Flowers, who you just took in the first round last year, looks like the real deal. Get someone on that defense that can make plays. Mason Smith is a really exciting player to watch. And look out for his draft stock to rise, as you mentioned. He has the tools for it. And I think Ravens fans would be happy to get another, menacing player on that defensive line.
Yeah, and I also have them going with defense here. I have them going with cornerback, my fifth best cornerback in this class so far, Kalen Carson from Wake Forest. He has very good speed, probably the best acceleration in the draft so far. A guy that would definitely help this defense out a lot. Their cornerback position has been a little bit shaky the past few years. Offensively, this team is really good. We know that. We saw with their draft pick last year with Zay Flowers. So I think going with defense would be the right move here. Carson is one of those guys that has really jumped up a lot of people's boards, projected towards that second, third round area. A lot of people going with the first round pick for here, especially towards the late. I've seen him go as high as 20. He's a great guy, and I think he's going to rise up a lot of boards, especially with the question marks. Kind of even after guys like Kool-Aid and Kalen King, I think you could make an argument for a lot of guys. I've seen people make an argument for Carson being the third best. With that speed, it's good. My question marks around him, though, is he's a very handsy player, which could provide some issues, especially in the NFL with a lot of these top end receivers. But that's one of those things where if he doesn't get caught and he can play with his hands, especially in the NFL, we've seen it work out very well for a lot of guys. But one of the question marks that I have towards him, but with that speed, if he goes out there and he runs as fast as he potentially could in the 40-yard dash, I wouldn't be surprised if he jumps up a lot of draft boards and he could be even the third cornerback drafted in this class.
Yeah, I like Carson too. His scouting eerily reminds me of Jeff Okudah, so I have my issues with him, but he could be really solid. At 30, it's the 49ers, obviously one of the best teams in football. They don't have a whole lot of pressing needs, especially with Brock Purdy looking legit at quarterback. I wouldn't even think about giving them one here. So on the opposite side of Nick Bosa, they have Clelin Ferrell, a guy that the Raiders picked early a couple years ago. I think you could upgrade from there. JT Tumalu is on the board here from Ohio State. Just a really good edge rusher. Run defense, pass defense, he does it both. He's powerful. He has some finesse moves in the bag. I think he would fit really well. The 49ers could go a whole bunch of directions here, mostly because they don't have a direction that they like really need to go to. So I think with JT out of Ohio State, you had him going a little earlier. He's around the end of the first round, early second round in a lot of people's mocks. I think it would be good value here, and 49ers could really go anywhere here. So I'm curious to see where you go.
Yeah. And I mean, these last three picks with the 49ers, the Chiefs, and the Eagles, the rich just get richer. All these picks that we see every year, these three teams end up getting players that fall. And for me, the 49ers are getting Xavier Worthy here. Probably my favorite overall receiver in this draft. I wouldn't say that he's necessarily the best. He has the best speed. The one issue that I have with him is the same issue that we saw with DeVonta Smith. This guy is very undersized. Last year in his sophomore year, he was weighing about 165, which has worked in college. He did put on a few pounds coming into this season. He's about 172-ish now. You still would like to see him bolster up a little bit. I think with DeVonta Smith, what we saw before, I did have a lot of question marks because of that size. And Xavier Worthy is a lot faster than we see. But with a guy that's that fast, with a lot of great man corners, you put him against a guy like Jalen Ramsey, and if he gets pressed on the line, it's going to be an issue. If he can bolster up, though, then that'll be fine. He can also have the possibility to run a 4.3, if not even lower in the 40. I mean, he's one of the fastest guys that we've seen. There's a reason why Quinn Ewers is one of the best quarterbacks in the country right now. He's looking very good with guys like this. And if you put him on the 49ers, you give him the Deebo Samuel role. If you give this guy a screen pass, you give this guy a touch pass in the backfield, he can give you a 95-yard touchdown and get in the end zone in 3 seconds. It would be insane to see him on the 49ers offense. And I think he could go higher, but obviously that size is a big question mark.
For sure. And at 31, the Chiefs are here. I think it's fair to say they still need some help in the wide receiver room. They have a lot of questions there. And at tight end, Travis Kelce is getting a little older too. So Mahomes is going to need more targets. A guy you mentioned earlier, a guy that I really, really like and would like to put higher is Rome Odunze out of Washington. Talk about wide receivers that make quarterbacks look even better. He's done it for Penix Jr., who I had going a little earlier as well. He runs deep routes really well, as we've seen at Washington. Mahomes has had to shorten his field a little bit recently, throwing a lot of shorter passes, but we know he has the arm talent and the creativity to hit guys down the field. I think Rome would prove to be open down the field over and over again. He has good sideline awareness, which fits with the Chiefs offense really well. And if he can develop correctly, he can be a wide receiver one, right? And you got it. If you have an opportunity to get that at 31, I think the Chiefs have to take it. I really like Rome. I think him and Mahomes would be super fun. So I would love to see this work on field. And he's here at 31. So Kansas City has to do it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I like them going with wide receiver here too. The wide receiver room hasn't looked great overall. My best wide receiver left available, very different guy from Xavier Worthy. I have them going with Johnny Wilson here. At 6'7", this would be unfair if you put him and Travis Kelce out there for the offense. He is fast. We'll have to see what he runs in the 40. He's predicted between that 4.4 and 4.5 area. If he can run a 4.4, even like a 4.5, at 6'7" and 230. I mean, he's going to rise up a bunch of boards. He doesn't have the best technical skills compared to a lot of receivers in this class, but you put him on an offense with Patrick Mahomes at 6'7" and potentially a 4.4, 4.5 speed, and it's going to be very hard to stop. A very big physical guy, and he's almost the same size as a guy like Travis Kelce, who's a tight end. So at 6'7", a very good high target point for Patrick Mahomes. They already have a lot of smaller guys like Kadarius Toney, Richie James, who can run those smaller, shorter routes. So I think it would help them getting a bigger guy here.
Yeah, and that would be a fun fit. Last pick in the first round, the Eagles are in this spot. The Eagles, obviously, they're projected to win the Super Bowl by these rankings. I mean, they've looked like the best team in football right now, or at least pretty close to it. So they don't have a lot of holes. You say rich gets richer. I think that's what they got to do at this spot. The only spot I'm not completely bought in for them is middle linebacker, and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is a guy I want to talk about. I think he's the prototypical best middle linebacker in this class by far. Obviously, a guy like Barrett Carter is fighting for it, but he can play more edge. Trotter is that guy in the center of the field that can be your shot caller on defense. I know Nakobe Dean is pretty solid, but he hasn't looked amazing in the NFL so far. I think Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is probably a better prospect at this point. And Trotter Jr. just does a lot of things really well. He can pass cover. He's really good at getting to the quarterback for a middle linebacker. And he's just solid all around. He looks confident when he plays. And for middle linebackers, passing an eye test is really, really important. And Trotter does that for me. I think the Eagles will be happy to get another middle linebacker in the spot. Him and Nakobe Dean can coexist too. I don't really see it as a replacement. But with the offense that looks so good, with a defense that looks good every year, there's a lot of different directions you could go. I think Jeremiah Trotter Jr. just has a ton of talent. And in real life, with the value of middle linebacker, he might not be a first round guy, but saw a guy like Jack Campbell go top 16 last year. And I think Trotter's a pretty comparable comparison to him. So I think it would be a really good pick. Eagles, I'm again interested to see where you go because there's a lot of different directions. But if they bring in Trotter, I don't think anyone would be upset.
Yeah, and I do have them going with defense too. I think towards the end of this first round, especially a team like the Eagles, you feel comfortable pretty much drafting any position since your team is very good overall. We've seen them go with a lot of defensive players the past few years, basically taking the whole entire national championship team from the Georgia Bulldogs last year. This year, I do have them going with Cameron Kinchens from Miami. I think he's one of the guys that you could argue that he's a top 25, 20 overall prospect. But since he's at the safety position overall, it does kind of lower his draft stock a little bit. I don't really think that he could play cornerback that well. I think he basically, compared to a guy that we talked about a little earlier in Cooper DeJean, who is just basically a defensive back, I think Kinchens is just overall a safety. And I think it's good for the Eagles in this spot overall. The safety has been a little bit shaky for them. They don't really have as many playmakers in the safety room as they do in the cornerback room with James Bradbury, Darius Slay, Kelee Ringo now. They have a lot of great players back there. So I think this would help their secondary a lot. And also, it's one of these picks that we talk about every year. Whoever gets that Super Bowl pick, if it works out, it does. If it doesn't, your team's very good overall. So in the end, it does matter. But with the 32nd pick in the first round, if he's a bust, then it doesn't really come out as much.
Yeah, for sure. And with that being said, I think that wraps it up. This is our first mock draft of the year. Very fun to get to. Things are going to change with the college football season shaking up, as well as the NFL season. These teams are going to be picking in much different spots when we talk about it going forward. So with that being said, we appreciate the love you guys have been showing on the channel. It's very fun to come in and make these videos. And if any of these takes age really well, we'll make sure to let you guys know about it. If they don't age so well, then forget about it.
Yeah. And with that being said, through this mock draft too, like you said, a lot will change. I don't think we really had any of the same picks outside of the first two. I'm pretty sure those were their only picks that were exactly the same. I think we may see more change just based off this draft position overall. There's a lot of teams that have a lot of needs. And like we said before, there's a lot of guys that fell in our mock draft just because there were teams that had different needs than some of the players. So once we start to see things shake up a little bit more, once we see players kind of develop a little bit more, we'll have a little different look towards then. As of right now, our first mock draft of the year, we'll be coming back with another one in the next few weeks. It'll definitely start to pick up once we get towards January, after we get past everything and we finally get into the NFL draft season officially, after college is done, once we start getting those workouts too. Then we'll be coming out here with pretty much a mock draft a week like we did last year. So a lot will change from now between then. But with that being said, we'll see you when we come back with that one.
See you guys.